All right. Thank you everyone for coming today. I believe we are now live on Zoom and live on Facebook. My name is Emily. I work at the Sage branch of the Bay County Library System. And you are attending tonight one of our evening sessions. Our evening sessions are a monthly adult program series featuring fun and engaging mix of presentations, lectures, workshops, demonstrations, author visits, and performances on topics covering arts, culture, history, science, and more. We do have other upcoming programs that you might be interested in. Our next evening sessions will take place 2 weeks from today on November 18th and features Jordan from Electric Kitsch. Jordan's going to be speaking on the importance of archiving. Many people look at their records and see a collection or dollar signs. Jordan sees his as an archive, an active, tangible learning library. Considering historical events that threaten this preservation, Jordan wants to speak about the idea of a self-archive and the ability to learn for free, preserve what you know, what you can see, what you hear, and what you feel. So that one is coming up. You can register on our webpage, or if you are watching via live on Facebook, this one will also be live on Facebook, and our evening sessions are recorded. So if you want to share one of our presentations with somebody or you're gonna miss it, there's another way to watch. Tonight we have with us Kevin Kendrick. Kevin Kendrick joined the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 1981 and spent the next 25 years in the FBI working in virtually every area of investigative responsibility, including 2 tours of duty at the FBI headquarters. Kevin served at almost every level in the Bureau as well, beginning as an investigator for 7 years and then continuing into increasingly complex management roles. Kevin, well, I'll let him talk more about him rather than giving you everything away early on. And with that, this is Kevin Kendrick.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Emily. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak tonight. It's a pleasure to do this. I think Jordan's presentation in 2 weeks is probably going to be a lot more fun than this one, but I'm going to try to have some fun with it tonight anyway. So bear with me. I'm going to be talking about the FBI, giving you a little bit of history on the organization, what it is, what it isn't, what they do and what they don't do, and some information about my career trajectory. It's a career path, by the way, that I wouldn't necessarily advise anybody to take, but it worked out well for me. So we'll start off here with at the beginning, always a great place to start. So this is when the FBI was born, 1908. The Attorney General at that time was a guy by the name of Charles Bonaparte. He was a very professional guy, very dedicated. He was also someone who didn't have any investigators working for him. So in 1908, he requested permission to hire 10 former Secret Service agents to form special investigators for the Department of Justice. So we always look at this date, 1908, as being the year we were actually born. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution of the mission of the FBI. And I'm going to kind of go through the history fairly quickly here because this is information that's readily available to you in your nearest Wikipedia. So the Bureau's mission has evolved over time. When you look at certain incidents, like in 1910, the passage of the Mann Act gave the Bureau of Investigation, as it was known at that time, authority to look at cases involving the trafficking of women across state lines. And then in 1917, when America entered the war, the emphasis there was on looking at individuals who were involved in treason and anarchists. And the Bureau at that time looked at people like Eugene Debs and Emma Goldman and actually caused them to be deported as a result of their anti-war activities. And then in 1919, this was kind of an important date for us. This was the first what we call identification order. It's kind of like an all points bulletin that we still use today. Identification orders are used to send information on wanted fugitives to different police departments and different FBI offices across the nation. This one happened to be for a soldier who was a walk away from a fort in Virginia, and he was captured in about 6 months. So some of the Bureau first. This is just kind of fun information. Alaska Davidson was an agent from 1922 until 1924. She was the first female agent hired by the Bureau. However, when J. Edgar Hoover became director in 1924, he asked for her resignation. She had been brought on board primarily to handle investigations involving the Mann Act. This guy, James Wormley Jones, was hired in 1919, and he was actually the first Black FBI agent. Had a very interesting background. He joined the Washington, D.C. Police Department in 1905, eventually became a detective. He was a captain in the Army in World War I, decorated, but he was hired because at that time in 1919, there was a big Pan-African movement going on in the United States, led of course by Marcus Garvey. And he was hired to actually infiltrate the Marcus Garvey organization, which he did successfully. And some of the information he developed as a result of that was used in Garvey's court case. Then we have the oldest FBI agent ever hired. His name was Emilio Kosterlitsky. He became an agent in 1917 and served until 1926, but he is the oldest agent that was ever hired at the age of 63. He had a great background, though. He had been in the military, in the Mexican army, and in the Russian army. He actually left the Mexican army in 1914 when Pancho Villa was going a little nuts on the border. And that's where Emilio did most of his work, working in the Mexican border and working with Mexican informants. So fast forward to the 1920s. I'm going to go a little bit by decade here just to get through some history of the Bureau. It was a really booming time for everyone. Gangs were everywhere. Of course, Prohibition was in effect, had gone into effect in 1920, and would be in effect for the next 13 years. But of course, when liquor became illegal, it created the opportunity for gangs to enter into the picture to supply something that was very much still in demand. This was a headline, of course, of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And this was a picture of Lucky Luciano and Albert Anastasia and a couple of other guys here in this picture. So, talk a little bit about J. Edgar Hoover. He joined the Department of Justice in 1917, and he was appointed by Attorney General Palmer Mitchell and had responsibility for the infamous Palmer raids that focused on communist and communist activity. Hoover was named assistant director in 1921 and director of the Bureau in 1924. It was at that time that he actually started professionalizing the FBI. At the time he took over, the Bureau had about 650 employees, and that included about 440 agents. He got rid of quite a few of those because they didn't fit his picture of what agents should look like. And that's also why he got rid of Alaska, because she obviously didn't fit his picture of what agents should look like, i.e. male. So he started professionalizing the FBI. He implemented a practice that we still employ now, and that is age restrictions. At that time, they were 25 to 35. You couldn't be older than 35. And he also, probably more importantly, merged two significant repositories of fingerprints that were being maintained by the federal government at that time. He merged those into one big center, creating the first really identification division that's still in effect today. So give him a lot of props for that. And of course, 1930s, we had John Dillinger and Machine Gun Kelly and all of those guys running around like crazy and creating havoc. But this was a wonderful time for Hoover to really excel at what he did best, and that is manipulating the media. used that time to publicize the Bureau's efforts in combating all types of interstate crime. But one of the most important things he did in the 30s was to establish the National Academy. Now, this National Academy runs in parallel with the FBI New Agents Academy. They're centered in the same place in Quantico, Virginia today. But this was a major coup because this gave police officers from all around the country an opportunity to come back and receive training from the FBI. And of course, that training also took the form of some indoctrination. And when they went back out into the field, it created instant liaison points of contact for agents working in those territories. And to this day, it's still, you'll still see certain officers exhibiting their plaques for attendance at the National Academy. The 1940s, another interesting time for the FBI because this was of course during World War II. Fighting saboteurs and communists were the priority in the 40s. They required more employees, so the Bureau was able to increase their workforce in 1940. But most importantly, during this time, the Bureau was able to set up this organization called the Special Intelligence Service. I know this is probably a little hard to see, but these little circles here represent where agents were assigned in South America and Central America. And they were specifically assigned to combat the growing Nazi presence in Central and South America. So the Bureau took it upon themselves, of course, with the approval of the president, to set up shop down there and create a counterintelligence bureau. And they were quite successful. By 1946, they had identified almost 900 Axis spies, 280 propaganda agents, 222 agents smuggling strategic war materials, 30 saboteurs, and about 100 other different types of agents. They also collected radio sets that the Nazis were using for information transmission back to Germany. And this is when the Bureau first started developing the fine art of counterintelligence, not really taking those radio transmitters, but using them to send back false information to Nazi Germany. This guy on the right, Vasily Zubelin, was the second secretary of the Soviet Union to the United States. So in 1943, the Bureau received a tip that he was actively working to get information on the Manhattan Project. They followed him to California, observed him meeting with someone who had a connection to the Manhattan Project. They were able to place eavesdropping equipment in that person's house, and they were able to record incriminating conversations about Vasily Zubelin. This was kind of a wake-up call, though, for the FBI, because up until this time, we had viewed the Soviet Union as our partners in the war against Nazi Germany and their allies. So to understand that they were actually using people in embassies over here was kind of a real awakening for them. And we were caught kind of flat-footed on that. 1950s and 1970s, another interesting time for us. This is when civil rights would really take on added importance for the Bureau. This happened primarily after the passage of Brown v. Board of Education. And of course, most of the civil rights cases were handled in the South. That was kind of problematic because most of the agents back then are working with police officers and sheriffs who many times were part of the problem in terms of the people committing these acts of violence against Blacks and Jews in the South at that time. So it was really problematic, but nevertheless, they did try to pursue those cases where they could. This meeting of the mobsters in upstate New York, that's referred to as the Appalachian meetings, was really interesting because up until this time, even though everybody knew that organized crime was in existence in the United States, Hoover, for whatever reason, just did not want to devote any resources to it. But this meeting of the 5 families in upstate New York in the 1950s that just happened to be observed by a sharp New York State detective, state police detective, which actually caused all the mobsters to run from the house they were meeting in into their cars and to speed away, not before this detective and some other folks with him were able to get license plates. This was a major news story and kind of an embarrassment to the FBI because it was clear evidence that organized crime was very much alive and well and actively planning their next steps. We were helped in understanding what organized crime looked like in 1963 when this individual, Joseph Valachi, testified before Senate Subcommittee on Organized Crime. After that, in the 1970s, there was legislation passed primarily involving the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, or the RICO Act, which really gave us a leg up in terms of addressing organized crime. Of course, domestic counterintelligence, great idea. It was used very effectively against domestic terrorism groups, especially the Ku Klux Klan in the 1960s. But as might be expected, I should say, it was misused and abused when some of the COINTELPRO investigations and techniques were applied against college students in the late 1960s and actually continuing up until 1970. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about J. Edgar. Passed away in May 1972 after 47 years as director. And as you might expect with anybody serving in a position for that length of time, there's good things and there's bad things. And while he started off good in professionalizing the Bureau, instituting age restrictions and doing background checks on people, he actually got to the point where he was abusing his powers quite regularly. And I love this quote from President Harry Truman, who said that Hoover had transformed the FBI into his private secret police force. Hoover said, "We want no Gestapo or secret police. The FBI is trending in that direction. They are dabbling in sex life scandals and plain blackmail." J. Edgar Hoover would give his right eye to take over, and all congressmen and senators are afraid of him. So it's interesting. You can go to certain FBI offices today, and you'll still see pictures of Hoover hanging in certain offices. He's highly revered by a lot of former agents, primarily the older ones. I'm not so sure you'll see these today, but when I was in the Bureau, it was not uncommon at all to see a picture of J. Edgar Hoover hanging on the wall of one of the smaller offices. I had one actually in one of my offices, but I took it down fairly quickly. So we're going to jump ahead to today's FBI, and I want to say that as a result of what happened on 9/11, the FBI changed overnight, literally, from a primarily criminal organization, criminal investigation focused agency to one that looked at intelligence as informing it as to what investigative steps to take. We were reshaped forever by 9/11. Prior to that time, we had spent a lot of time on general criminal matters, but 9/11 changed it all. It was interesting because certain field offices had parts of the puzzle for 9/11. The Minneapolis office in particular had information about some flight plans that would-be terrorists were trying to get involved in. The New York office had other information about activity, and our office in San Diego, had some information that pertained to the plot. But because the FBI was really siloed in those days, we didn't do a lot of intelligence sharing, and offices kind of kept their information to themselves. We realized that we could no longer continue to function in that way. So here's what the Bureau looks like today. This is our mission, the priorities, the vision, and I'm going to go into each of these. The mission is straightforward. It's to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution of the United States. That's about as straightforward as you can get. And by protecting the American people, they're really talking about embracing their vision of being ahead of the threat. Never, ever, ever to let 9/11 happen again. I will tell you that after 9/11, everything that came in related to terrorism was given priority. It didn't matter how silly or innocuous the call was. Every single lead was tracked and shared in a database that every field office had access to. So we wanted to stay ahead of the threat and avoid those silos that prevented us from preventing 9/11. And then, of course, the mission priorities to protect the U.S. from terrorist attack, number one. And it's going to be that way for probably the rest of our lives. Protecting the U.S. against foreign intelligence, espionage, and cyber operations. Combating significant cyber criminal activity. Now, you see cyber mentioned twice here. Cyber in this regard is mentioned as an intelligence operation where different nation states or even terrorist organizations attempt to do something nefarious within our infrastructure to disrupt, such as what we saw in the 2016 elections. This is talking primarily about gangs that are involved in trying to defraud you of your money and things of that nature. Combating public corruption at all levels is number four. Protecting civil rights, still here. Combating transnational criminal enterprises. And these are primarily international gangs that are involved in criminal activity, such as money laundering or human trafficking, significant white collar crime. This is a huge problem in this country. And it's one that I personally believe needs to be given more priority because more people are hurt by the white collar crimes that happen in this country than we realize, most of the time because the sentences are fairly light in comparison to the harm caused. And these are things that you just don't hear about. And then finally, combating significant violent crime. So most of our resources are devoted nowadays to number one, protecting the U.S. from terrorist attack. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the intelligence community. These are the SEALs of all 16 agents that participate in the intelligence community. They work for the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, who works for the president. And this is an organization, an entity that allows for information sharing quickly and in a very fulsome manner. The Department of Justice represents several agencies, but the FBI is represented by our intelligence branch here. We don't have any criminal components over there. This is strictly the folks who work in the intelligence branch. So one other thing that I'd like to take a minute to explain here is, I know there's a lot of confusion sometimes about what the FBI does and what the CIA does. The CIA is an intelligence gathering organization that works overseas. They don't do anything here in the United States. That's the responsibility of the FBI. The CIA also has responsibility for conducting covert operations overseas at the direction of the president and the president alone. The FBI is also not the Secret Service. Secret Service used to be a part of the Department of Treasury. They are now a part of Homeland Security post 9/11. But their remit, of course, is protecting the president and actually many foreign dignitaries when they travel to the United States. We are not ATF or the DEA. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has a relatively small investigative responsibility focused on guns and explosive devices. The DEA, of course, is a single mission organization focused on drug cartels and the distribution of significant quantities of drugs. So as the primary investigative entity for the Department of Justice, the FBI has the responsibility for the lion's share of those violations falling under the Title 18 Code of Criminal Crimes. And there's like over 300 violations that the FBI has ultimate responsibility for. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my fabulous career here. This is me, believe it or not, starting out. This is a picture of me as a new officer taken in 1977. You can kind of tell I was going to be a cut up because I was wearing a soft grommet hat there. Officers in that day wore this 50 missions hat or they had one that had a hard grommet in it that made them look like, I don't know, security guards in my mind. So I kind of like the laid back look, and that's what I went with for the entire time I was on the police department, 1977 through 1980. This is a picture of the FBI Academy. I started here in January 1981, January 21st, as a matter of fact. And I didn't know if I was going to stay there. I didn't know if my class was going to stay there. We were sworn in on the 19th. We flew to DC, had an orientation at FBI headquarters, then took a bus to Quantico, where we spent the next 18 weeks. But before that happened, of course, we had a new president at that time. Ronald Reagan had been inaugurated, and he immediately instituted a hiring freeze. He wanted to make the hiring freeze retroactive to the date of his election. And that's actually something that had to be decided by the Supreme Court. So if it had been ruled okay by the Supreme Court, I would have been out of a job, and that was not a good thing at that time. So this is a picture of me at graduation. I was our class valedictorian for New Agents Class 81-3. I was also our class speaker, and it's some of my family members that were celebrating with me. A few pounds lighter, more hair certainly. My dad was way ahead of the curve on the hair game. First office was Detroit, and that was common. People who were hired at that time went back to the office that they were processed through. So it was interesting in Detroit. My first assignment was on a counterintelligence squad, and I was only on that squad for a week or two, and I couldn't understand why they transferred me later. Later on, I found out, of course, that when you're on the counterintelligence squad, you actually do a lot of work on wires. They have a lot of electronic surveillance cases, so you're sitting there listening to recorded conversations a lot. But in our wire room, as it was known then, I found this out a couple of years later. There was a criminal investigation going on of some police officers in Detroit. So they didn't want me in the same room as the guys that were sitting on the wire for the police department. They really didn't know where my loyalties may have lain. Oops, sorry. So I was transferred to the bank robbery squad at that point, and I learned very quickly that there was one point of contact for going over to DPD's armed robbery unit or their homicide unit. I knew a lot of the guys there. I could go there and get warrants, but that would have been breaking a cardinal rule for the FBI, and that is one point of contact. And the agent who had that point of contact would always keep the best cases for himself and then dole out the rest. So I just started going to other police departments in Wayne County and getting cases from them. Black agents in Detroit. So this was interesting. All of the black agents in Detroit, and there weren't that many at that time, but all of them had fake ID. So when I went over to the bank robbery squad, they asked me if I wanted to go to Lansing to get fake ID, and I said, why? And they said, well, we just figured you'd want to do, what the other black guys in Detroit are doing, and that's going into these medical clinics and buying drugs, prescriptions. I said, no, that's not why I joined the FBI. I have no desire to do that. So I didn't. One thing I want to point out here, because this is important, blacks in the FBI in 1981, when I joined, numbered about 4%. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. So next office, after spending about a year in Detroit, I got transferred to Kansas City. 1982, I would be there from 1982 through 1984. And the idea of going to a smaller office at that time, which was the goal of FBI headquarters, was to give agents the ability to work a variety of cases since you're in a smaller setting. Detroit at the time probably had 225 agents. Kansas City, on the other hand, had maybe about 50, 60 agents at the time. So the idea was to go there to gain experience by working a variety of cases. And it started off well. I was assigned to a white-collar crime squad for a couple of months working fraud against the government matters. But we were granted, the Bureau was granted concurrent jurisdiction with DEA to investigate Title 21. Those are drug violations of the criminal code, federal criminal code. We were granted concurrent jurisdiction in January of 1982. So with that concurrent jurisdiction, our special agent in charge, and I'm going to refer to this is, I'll use these acronyms. Special agent in charge is also known as SAC, and then assistant special agent in charge. Those are the guys and ladies directly underneath the special agent in charge, the SAC, are known as ASACs, ASACs. So our SAC decided that he wanted to form a drug squad, and I was one of 4 agents who was selected for that drug squad. And my beat was going to be Lawrence, Kansas. So rather than getting all of this experience that I was going to get by working a variety of cases, I spent the next 2 years actually working in Lawrence, Kansas, working with some great folks from the Lawrence Police Department and the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, working at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. They had an applied English center at that time, and they had a number of students from all over the world. But they had a huge drug problem in Lawrence, Kansas at the time. They probably still have a huge drug problem in Lawrence, Kansas. But we actually were able to determine that these Colombians had a supply route through Miami, originating from the Medellin cartel, but it was a really big deal. I ended up writing 2 Title III affidavits. Title III is electronic surveillance, to investigate this case, and it ended up with indictments of 8 people 2 years later. And it was a great case, but it taught me a lot about writing Title III affidavits and using what we call sensitive investigative techniques. So guess what? Back to Detroit. I was assigned to the property crime squad. And again, rather than follow senior agents, which was the expectation, having been kind of having my appetite, my investigative appetite whetted in Kansas City by using the wiretap experience, I wanted to find out what sensitive investigative techniques we could possibly use in addressing property crimes. And by property crimes, I mean interstate transportation of stolen motor vehicles, interstate theft of stolen property, theft from interstate shipments, all those kinds of things. So that's what our squad did. I knew that Detroit was the automobile theft capital of the United States at that time. So the first thing I did was to meet with the big 3 auto insurance companies and learn from them what the extent of their problems were. Of course, it was automobile theft insurance, but they clued me in on something. They said, you know what, we think a big part of this is fraud. We think a big part of this is people fraudulently reporting their cars stolen. Boom. I thought, okay, this is going to be my entree into an undercover operation. So I've developed a couple of informants who had junkyards, and we crafted an undercover plan for them. The undercover operation, it's a very arduous process with the Bureau. They have 2 different types of undercover operations. There's Group 2 operations, which can be run by the field office. And then there are Group 1 operations, which have to be approved by headquarters because they involve sensitive techniques. So my project was a Group 1 project. And this is what happened as a result of it. When this case broke in 1986, I think it was the largest case in the FBI's history. 170 people were charged in an automobile theft insurance sting operation, as the Free Press called it at that time. Included in this were 3 police officers and a few lawyers and housewives and businessmen. Interestingly, about 1/3 of the people who reported their cars stolen lived not in Detroit, but they would report their cars stolen in Detroit. So it really created a false image of Detroit at that time as being a car theft capital. And so how it worked is we would essentially, through using the junkyards and the informants, we would ask people to give us their cars before they reported them stolen. They, of course, would approach us and say, hey, I need to make this car disappear. I need for it to go away because it's got a bad engine or whatever, or I'm just tired of it. I don't feel like making payments. So we would take the car. We would also take the title. And then we, of course, would mark that title with some ink that you couldn't see. And we would have constructive possession of the vehicle at the time that they reported it stolen. And we had like a 98% conviction rate with this case, although it did inundate the U.S. Attorney's Office and the federal court system in Detroit for quite some time. The coolest thing about this case, though, was that the following year, reported automobile thefts went down by 30%. And that told us that we were making, we had made an impact on this particular crime problem. Not in Kansas anymore. So that case, it was called Operation Steam Clean, by the way, got me interested in becoming a manager in the Bureau. So I applied for that property crimes desk where I had come back to as an agent from Kansas City, became a supervisor there. And after a while, I got transferred to Financial Institution Fraud Squad in Detroit. Did that for a couple of years, learned a lot on the financial institution fraud. But I was being encouraged to go to headquarters because if you wanted to continue in the career path in the Bureau, you had to spend some time in headquarters. Two ways to get promoted in the FBI as an entry-level manager. You can get promoted in the field or you can go to headquarters. They're both considered General Schedule 14, GS or GM 14 positions. So I actually took a lateral transfer to get to headquarters. And I worked in the Financial Institution Fraud Unit at headquarters. There were 4 of us, and I'll give you just an idea of what the structure is at headquarters. You have the supervisory special agents. We are the GS-14s. Above them, you have unit chiefs. They are GS-15s. Above them, you have section chiefs. So the Financial Institution Fraud Unit was part of the bigger white-collar crime section, which reported up to an assistant director in the criminal investigative division. So that's the structure for that. 2 weeks on duty at headquarters. I get this criminal referral form from the Resolution Trust Corporation in Kansas City. And as you can see, it's dated September 1992. It was received then by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Little Rock, but the RTC had sent us a copy of this for our information. And it's about this entity called Madison Guarantee Savings and Loan. And I thought, oh, that's nice. So continuing, and one other thing, most criminal referral forms at this time were 2 pages. This one was 29 pages. So just by the heft of it, I knew it was going to be something really special. And as you can see, this criminal referral form alleges that between 1984 and 87, James McDougal, Susan McDougal, Lisa Anspaugh, that part is cut off, Jim Guy Tucker, who was the governor of Arkansas at that time, Bill Clinton, Hillary Rodham Clinton, and other individuals where he had in it as identified were principals in doing business with the Madison Guarantee Savings and Loan. Now, to be fair, Bill and Hillary Clinton were listed as witnesses in this thing, but the intention was clear that because of their association with it, it could quickly involve them becoming subjects of the investigation. As a result of that, I ended up having a meeting with my unit chief and my section chief, again, Financial Institution Fraud Unit, White Collar Crime Section. We had a meeting with our counterparts at the Department of Justice over how we should handle this, because this is September 1992. There's a little old thing called the presidential election coming up in November of 1992. So we met with the Assistant Attorney General for Criminal Investigations at that time, and the Special Counsel for Financial Institution Fraud, as well as a few other DOJ types in the office of the Assistant Attorney General, who was a gentleman by the name of Robert Mueller. I'm sure you recognize that name. That was my first contact with Bob Mueller. It was not to be my last. But Bob Mueller wisely said, you need to tell the Little Rock office not to do anything that would alert the nation that there is an FBI investigation into involving a candidate for the President of the United States. So that's what this communication that I did. You can see this is a reference my telephone call from me to the investigative agent in Little Rock on 10/8. Followed that up. Bureau does that. If you don't write it down in the Bureau, it doesn't exist. So this was my communique to him, essentially telling him to conduct a limited investigation, but nothing that would rise to media attention and for the election. So that was my first exposure to something that could potentially blow up. I ended up testifying at 2 different committees on the Whitewater matter, committees that were convened several years later. I gave many depositions on this case. And interestingly, I was the only guy from headquarters to testify, not my unit chief, not the section chief. I was the only one from the FBI headquarters to actually testify. And I felt like I was kind of sold down the river. So anyway, it was fun. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot about how government works and how it doesn't work during that time. So we got a new director during this time, and he was intent on downsizing headquarters. So he was offering people who wanted to take a voluntary demotion back to where they came from, and it wouldn't be held against you in terms of your career development. And I thought, okay, this was a chance for me to get back to Detroit. And while it was a little unsatisfying having to step back to being an agent, but I thought, you know what? I'll learn from this. I'll do it. I wanted to get back to Detroit anyway, and this gave me the opportunity to do that. Well, not only did it give me the opportunity to do that, more importantly, it gave me the opportunity to develop an appreciation for what an agent has to go through. All of a sudden, I had to work cases. I had to develop informants. I had to document those investigations. And it was really helpful for me to do that. Helped me a lot later on when I got back into the management program. But also during this time, I was one of 4 agents that was selected to work on the Oklahoma City bombing case. And of course, James Nichols and Terry Nichols had a big Michigan connection. I participated in the drafting of the search warrant for the farm in Decker, Michigan, where the Nichols brothers and Tim McVeigh practiced blowing things up, which is something they had a great love for. So that was that. And then because of my participation in the Oak Bomb case, the Oklahoma City bombing case, I had an opportunity to become a manager again. I applied for a management position after being back in the division for about a year, and I was appointed manager of Squad C4 in Detroit, which was the bank robbery squad. Great squad. This thing happened. This was the Comerica Bank. We thought it was a robbery gone bad, and this just kind of blew everybody away because this guy here in the camouflage coat actually walked into the bank, killed the manager, killed the assistant manager, shot one other employee, not this person. This person is just thrown out on the floor, not injured. But then when he left the bank, he actually intercepted this guy who was an elderly gentleman, was on his way, just getting money out of the ATM to go visit his dying wife. And this guy actually shotgunned him to death as well. Responding police killed the gunman, and what we thought was a bank robbery actually was just a love affair gone bad between this guy and one of the bank employees, and he was angry at the world. But I will never forget that case. I transferred from Squad C4 to the Oakland County Resident Agency. Now, a resident agency, every FBI field office, there are 56 FBI field offices, first of all. And then we have legal attaches in different places around the world. But the field offices are the center of operations. Detroit is a field office. Detroit had 12 or 13 smaller offices, satellite offices called resident agencies. I was given the assignment to manage the Oakland County Resident Agency. And that was a lot of fun because it was a big RA, one of the bigger ones in Detroit. Had about 20 agents working there, 4 support people. And Leading an RA is different because you're literally on your own. Oakland County's big. It's got 1.2 million people in it, lots of assets for the targets of counterintelligence cases. But you're the primary point person for the police departments, for city governments, and for the media. So you're like the SAC, but on a local level. So I learned a lot in Oakland County and certainly grew from that experience. I was promoted to the ASAC position in Detroit in 2000. And there were 3 of us at the ASAC level. So again, you have the SAC, the agent in charge, and then 3 ASACs. Well, on September the 10th, we were preparing for an inspection. Inspections are something that every field office goes through. They're internal inspections. They are done by, we have an entire inspection division that does nothing but goes around and inspects field offices every 3 years. They typically last about 3 weeks for an office the size of Detroit. They look at every investigative file. They look at all the informant files. They look at your contact with city leaders. They look at your liaison with police departments. They look at your relationships with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And if you are found to be the nomenclature at that time was if you were doing everything great, if you were knocking it out of the park, everybody wanted to be what was known as E&E, effective and efficient. If you were E&I, effective but inefficient, not good. If you were I&E, ineffective but efficient, which was a rare finding, not good. And if you were I, ineffective and inefficient, you could pretty much kiss your job goodbye. So everybody tried to make everything really pretty for the inspectors. Unfortunately, 9/11 happened the day after they arrived in our Detroit. And to their credit, these inspectors just hit the ground with us. We set up a command post that would be in effect for the next 10 months because of our proximity to Dearborn, which has the largest Muslim population outside of the Middle East in Dearborn. And I'll tell you, even though we had a lot of leads that went into Dearborn, we couldn't have had a better relationship with the people of that community. Extremely helpful, extremely cooperative. The relationship, while tense at times, was never adversarial. We always worked through their identified leaders, and they were very helpful in helping us resolve some questions and issues. So back to headquarters. Again, in 2002, I was promoted to the ranks of the Senior Executive Service, and I was selected for the Section Chief position of the Executive Development and Selection Program. So at FBI headquarters, again, you have unit chiefs, you have section chiefs, you have deputy assistant directors, and you have assistant directors, and then you have the deputy director and then the director. 2002, I was promoted to the head of the SES. I spoke to my good buddy, Bob Mueller, at least once a day because Mr. Mueller was very interested in speeding people along on the career path. People were retiring too soon. Once they hit age 50, they were leaving too soon. And with that, of course, a lot of expertise was walking out the door. I was promoted again in 2003 to the Deputy Assistant Director of the Administrative Services Division. So we did all of the hiring, all of the firing, just everything related to personnel in the Bureau. This really helped me a lot too. I mean, it really helped me a lot. It showed me a side of the FBI that I really just never knew existed. Of course, as a manager, I knew as a supervisor, you have a responsibility for not only managing the cases and conducting file reviews of your agents in a timely fashion. File reviews for each agent were conducted every 90 days or 60 days, depending on the case. But you also had a responsibility to understand your people. I had one agent when I was a supervisor in Detroit who actually went into a state of catatonia. He literally could not pick up a pen or a pencil. So, we obviously referred him to our medical team and got him evaluated. But as it turned out, I was his second supervisor in the span of about 6 months. And it turned out that he had he would have these panic attacks that were brought on by women and blacks. So the supervisor who preceded me was a woman, and of course, I'm black. So this agent just, he felt like he had been, I don't know, sentenced to hell, I guess, in his mind. But anyway, we got him the help he needed, and he ended up taking a medical retirement. I had another agent who, one of the things we have to do is, as supervisors, is to meet every informant. First of all, you want to make sure the person that's being paid money is real, that they actually exist. And then you have to have a conversation with them, make sure things are going well. So I will never forget meeting this one informant for a young agent on the squad, asking him if things were going well, if the money was okay, and him commenting to me that, oh, I would never do this for money. I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a second. I remember distinctly seeing a couple of receipts in the file for payments. This is what I'm thinking. I didn't say anything to him, obviously. Go back to the office, look in the file, 2 receipts in there. We have a policy that says every informant payment has to be witnessed by 2 agents. Horror story behind every FBI policy. So my first step is, let me get the other 2 agents in here. You got the case agent and then the witnessing agent. So I bring in the 2 witnessing agents separately, and sure enough, they tell me, no, I signed it after so-and-so brought it back. I was just trying to be a nice guy. Well, doesn't pay to be a nice guy. Brought the agent in after going back to the informant and verifying that he didn't receive any payments. Brought the agent in, and he admitted to falsifying the documents. So at that point, you're a lost cause to us as an FBI agent. Your credibility is shot. You can no longer take the stand because you are going to be found guilty of falsifying information. We are obligated under the Brady Act to disclose the Brady laws of criminal procedure. We have to reveal that to any defense attorney if that agent is going to be testifying. So we ended up firing the agent, and that's something that we would ordinarily do. I only had 2 years on the job, but he made a terrible decision. But it's one of the things that you have to do as a manager. One of the things that I learned when I got promoted to deputy assistant director, it quickly became apparent to me that FBI agents are no different than anybody else. They have problems. They have problems at home. They have sex change operations. I mean, it's the whole gamut. You see it all. And it was really helpful to me in understanding that our organization is no better and no worse than any other. So after 18 months at headquarters, I began applying for these SAC positions because that's really what I wanted to be when I grow up. And I applied for 3 jobs, one in Springfield, Illinois, one in Portland, one in Louisville, Kentucky. And go figure, I was number 1 in all 3 packages. They went up to the director to be signed, and Jenny and I were starting to pack because we knew we were going somewhere. We had to rank where we wanted to go, and I think we ranked Louisville number 1 or Portland number 1. I can't remember. I spent some time in Portland on a TDY before, and it was fun. Unfortunately, Director Mueller had different plans. He said, nope, it's nice that you're number 1 in all these packages, but you're not going anywhere, son. You're going to work for me for another 6 months, and that's what happened. He did say, though, however, at the end of that 6-month period, you can go wherever you want. And where I wanted to go was Charlotte, and that's where Jenny and I ended up. Being SAC, 2002, I was appointed, best job in the Bureau, 3 judicial districts, started to deal with 3 different U.S. attorneys' offices, 120 agents, 150 support personnel, 80 task force officers, biggest banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo here. We grew some contacts within the Muslim community and other communities. But then I got a call after about a year on the job. It was the deputy director inviting me to come back to headquarters. I said, no, this is when I started saying, you know, Jenny, it's time we left the Bureau. And that's what really resulted in my retirement in 2006. But one of the things that I wanted to share with you when I was SAC in Charlotte, probably my worst day in the Bureau. This was in May of 2005. This guy in this picture here on the left was my chief division counsel. Great guy, young man, very smart guy. He was the lawyer for the office. Well, I found out that he was being investigated by the Inspector General for an inappropriate relationship with an informant, and as you can see, for a false statement on his financial disclosure report. He was having his initial appearance on this day. I had a bunch of agents who came to my office and said they were going to show up in court for his initial appearance. And I said, you're not. Yeah, and nobody belongs over there except me, because I call the director when this is over and let him know what's going on. So I said, if you're going to go there, you're going to do it on your own time. So I insisted that there were almost 30 agents who ended up showing up at his initial appearance, but they were all on personal leave when they went to visit him. I go back to the office and I find out that a hate crime has been committed. A cross was burned in the backyard of a biracial couple in Charlotte. And I get this phone call, and who's on the call but Jesse Jackson, who happened to be in Charlotte for a Bank of America board meeting. Jesse is saying, how come the FBI isn't out here? Well, I get in my car, head out there, bring a couple of investigators with me. And while I'm there at the scene, I get a call from this guy saying, how come you had 30 agents in the courtroom while this guy is chewing on my other ear saying, how come you're not doing anything about this hate crime? Absolutely, without a doubt, my worst day in the Bureau. I explained to the director what happened. He was fine with that. Jesse told me later, really no animus intended. It was just him being Jesse, and he had to do it for the couple and for the media. So 25 years. I retired in 2006, June of 2006, May of 2006. And without a doubt, I would do this all again in a heartbeat. It's one of the best experiences of my lifetime. These folks are more than your coworkers. They are your family, because you spend so much time with them. And you're doing things not only for the benefit of your team and for the FBI, but for your country. Now, I just want to share with you, there are a few things that I think the agency could do better. And that is, for instance, our Black agent population is still only 4%. So it hasn't budged a bit. We're still at 4%. We have far too much factionalism and a lack of diversity in the Bureau. It's still a male-dominated organization. From a management perspective, we don't have enough minorities. We don't have enough females. There's not enough training in confirmation basis. And that's important as we're working with police officers all over the country. We need to understand what confirmation bias looks like. And again, the civil rights program is one that's really given short shrift by us. For instance, when I was in the Bureau in Detroit, out of the 220 agents that we had there, we had 2 investigative bodies assigned to civil rights, one for the Detroit office, and the other body was assigned to the other 13 resident agencies, 12 or 13. So that's it. I know I'm over my time. I apologize for that. I'm open to any questions if there are any.
Yeah, I had one that had come through. They were wondering if you have read either one of these books, A Higher Loyalty by Comey or Threat by McCabe, and if so, did you like one more than another?
I have not read McCabe's book, but I have read Jim Comey's book, and it's excellent. Jim Comey's is as straight as they come. He's an honest guy, a straight shooter. I loved working with him when I was in the Bureau, and the book was fascinating. And he's just, I can't say anything more about him other than he's a great guy, and he got a raw deal.
I have another question on our Zoom, but also to add in, if anybody has any other questions they have for Kevin, please put them in either the Zoom chat or the Facebook chat. This question's from Doug Weeks saying, it's good to see you again.
Yeah.
With the increasing priority in the cyber realm, how do you envision the FBI's recruitment activity in the next 5 years versus the last 10 to 15?
Well, it's definitely become more targeted. One of the things that I didn't mention, we've always done targeted hiring. Our needs change from year to year, and becoming an FBI agent is a very competitive process. I think as things become more interconnected, we're going to have to go to a deeper dive in terms of looking for people not only with cyber expertise, but I know we're actively looking to recruit people that are much younger. Our current minimum age is 23. I know there was some discussion at perhaps lowering that for people with cyber expertise who could assist in cyber investigations, because some of it is so technical, and it's truly the younger people that have the skill sets that are necessary for that. When I was Deputy Assistant Director in 2003, for instance, we hired 750 people that year out of an applicant pool of about 100,000 people.
Here's another question from Facebook. Can you speak about the FBI Citizens Academy program? Why was this academy started? Is this a community recruitment program? Volunteers?
Yeah, those are programs that are run by, they're known as community outreach specialists. They actually have responsibility for identifying people within the community, and they do invite people from the community. They try to look for people with differing backgrounds, but people who've had no prior exposure to law enforcement. It's really built as a community building exercise more than anything else. They run typically from 8 to 10 weeks. It's not a recruitment thing or anything like that at all. It's just to really help inform people about what the FBI does, our jurisdiction. They get to spend some time on the range and to go through some practical shooting. So it's more fun than anything else.
Another question from Facebook. What is the most interesting fraud case you worked on and why? And they are also asking, what was it like to work with?
The most interesting one I worked with was one that involved it was called BCCI, Bank of Credit, Commerce, and International. BCCI was a huge bank that was operating in the late 80s, early 90s. But they were involved in a lot of money laundering activity, which is how we got involved with them. And as the investigation progressed, we found out that they were also being investigated by the Southern District of New York, by the state of New York, rather, not the Southern District of New York, the state of New York. And Bob Morgenthau was the prosecutor at the time. So we got into a real tug of war with him over who would be pursuing the case. And we actually ended up turning over most of it to the state of New York. The other interesting part of that was that as we found out, and this is public information, the CIA was using the BCCI to help funnel some of their funds. So that was quite interesting.
Another question from Zoom. How much does the local national political leadership influence the weighting of where the FBI places investigative resources? For example, white collar crime versus right-wing extremism versus organized.
Yeah, well, we used to really pay close attention to the utilization of resources. They don't do that so much anymore, but there was a time when we had to record our time spent on a particular type of case, whether it was white collar or counterintelligence or organized crime. You recorded all of the time that you spent on a particular classification, because that information was reported back to Congress and used in funding us, and it was funded by program. So you had to make sure that the amount of resources you had allocated to a particular criminal program, or any investigative program for that matter, that your actual utilization was close to that. Nowadays, terrorism is number one. It's just that it's that clear. If anything comes in that's terrorist related, it's going to be investigated. They are utilizing most of the resources, continue to utilize most of the resources in certainly the major field offices, and that's both international terrorism and domestic terrorism. I'm not sure if I answered that question completely or not, but we really don't pay too much attention to that anymore. It doesn't really dictate Congress isn't paying too much attention to how our resources are being utilized.
For new agents, do you get a say in where they place you? What is the average time frame spent in one?
When I left the Bureau, yes, you did get a say. You got to rank your offices you got to rank, I think, your top 10 offices where you wanted to go. And they really did make every effort to send you to that office. The deal was, however, you were only going to stay there for 2 to 4 years. And then if you were in a small to mid-sized office, you were going to go to a big office and get your expertise. It's kind of the reverse of the philosophy we used when I was a new agent. They want you to go to big agents because they think you've had exposure to a number of different types of criminal investigations. And then you get to the big office, the New Yorks, the Detroits, the Philadelphias, the Miamis, San Francisco's, Los Angeles of the world. And then you're specialized at that point. You're plugged into a particular squad or program, and there you will remain.
Next question on Zoom. When tracking all leads for something as large as 9/11 or the Oklahoma City bombing, how do you sift through the huge amount of information and determine what is unimportant and does not need any more investigation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually had a program, a lead tracking program that we used both actually for 9/11 and for the Oklahoma City bombing. Every lead that came in was assigned a number and assigned to an agent. So there was really no prioritization. If something was an imminent threat, obviously you elevated it. But if it was something that was post tense or something that had happened already, you gave it to an agent or two agents, and those leads were all tracked, followed, resolved, and closed out on the lead sheet. But the cool thing about this was that all of the information, the person reporting it, the person involved, what you were looking at, all of those things actually went into this huge database that was searchable and retrievable, so that we could actually look at that thing from a historic perspective to see if there are parallels to current investigations. Very, very effective.
Okay, next we have a couple of questions that have to do more with, I think, your take on some different moments where the FBI or investigation was in the news. So first of all, what did you think of Robert Mueller making, or why do you think Robert Mueller made a public investigation of Hillary Clinton prior to the election when he did not for Bill?
Well, that wasn't Mr. Mueller. That was James Comey, who was the director of the FBI, who made that information public at the time. I think Jim probably thought that he was acting in the best interest of the Bureau at that time. I think he did it with good intentions. It was a terrible decision. I think he says today it was not the best decision. He really had no idea that it would have the influence that it had on the election. I think the thinking was it's a foregone conclusion that Clinton was going to win this race, and that even if he queued this up, it wouldn't impact her. He was afraid of what the impact would be to the Bureau if he didn't queue it up, and the Republicans found out later. So he erred on the side of doing what was best for the Bureau instead of adhering to Department of Justice policy, which is something that, of course, everybody knows now that he should have done. And if I had been there, I would have told him, don't do it, don't do it. I've gone through this. This is deja vu all over again. So please, please, please don't do that. It was really interesting to hear our current president talking about the promise of an October surprise, and then Attorney General Barr not coming through on that, which I was rather relieved, frankly.
About a month ago, the FBI uncovered a kidnapping plot against Governor Whitmer. Could you share either information on this or what your thoughts?
Of course, I have no information on that other than what I've read in the media, but obviously it's quite serious. And Governor Whitmer was not the only intended target. There was the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, who was also an intended target. And then you had the mayor of I believe, Tulsa or some city out in the Midwest who was the target of some threats by a resident there. It's really sad to see that this is where our country is going, where people feel as if they have the right to literally take the law into their own hands and do things like what they did in planning for the kidnapping attempt on Governor Whitmer. And you know, the evidence here is overwhelming. They have video of these guys training and talking about what they were going to do. I can't imagine that they won't get very, very stiff sentences. And hopefully, this will be a message to other groups, other domestic terrorist groups. And make no mistake about it, these folks are terrorists. They are terrorists. There's no other word to describe them, and they need to be dealt with as terrorists.
I think we're getting close to the end. We had a lot of great questions tonight. I got
definitely.
Someone was looking for your thoughts on current events, specifically the training of law enforcement personnel, what is well done and what can be improved, and also the relationship of the White House and law enforcement.
Yeah, boy, that's a really great question. Training can always be improved. We need training for police. Police are not given enough de-escalation training, in my estimation. I mentioned confirmation bias training. They really need to get a better handle on that, and that's true not only for FBI agents but for police in general. People need to understand what the Constitution is. I think classes, common language classes on what the Constitution actually means and what citizens' rights are, is something that we kind of gloss over during, I remember in my law enforcement training, not so much in the Bureau, we had classes on constitutional law, but on a local level, I think it's something that really isn't taught as well as it should. And then you have stories coming out, such as the one I saw today, about a training film that was used for the Kentucky State Police, where they're quoting Hitler in some of their tactics. And it's just an appalling video. And the governor, Andy Beshear, had no idea that the Kentucky State Police was utilizing this victim, or utilizing this film for training purposes in tactical and riot situations. And there's just no excuse for that. So training is something that's very dynamic. It's something that we have to continuously look at. We can be better informed by training, I think, and training needs, and having more substantial conversations with the communities that we're entrusted to protect. So when we have those conversations about what's needed, certainly sensitivity training, but just cultural awareness training, because there are some things that you just don't do, and officers can learn from just by going through those types of cultural awareness and sensitivity trainings.
All right, and I think our final question was somebody, oops, sorry, I turned my mute off. Our final question was somebody wanted a little more information about what you thought about working with Robert Mueller, and if you had any other stories.
What a guy. He was a taskmaster, for sure. A taskmaster, but I absolutely loved Bob Mueller and Jim Comey. They were both great guys. I love them both. I would do anything for either one of those guys because they really understood the Bureau and the importance of what it is that we were doing. They were adherents to the Constitution, and I respect that. So when Mr. Mueller, and I will always call him Mr. Mueller, asked me to stay for another 6 months, I grimaced a little bit, but I did it because I have that much respect for him.
All right, I think that is going to do it for us this evening. Thank you all so much for coming. And
thank you.
We do look for upcoming evening sessions. We do have another one coming up in 2 weeks. have a great night, everyone. We had lots of people expressing their thanks and saying that this was a wonderful program. So have a wonderful night, everyone.
Thank you.